Well, a historic peace deal was reached at the White House today with United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, normalizing relationships with Israel following decades of failed peace efforts between Israel and those Arab countries. Well, here to break down the specifics of today's historic deal is State Department spokesperson Morgan Ortagus. Morgan, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me.
All right, well, we keep hearing this is historic, but why does this matter to the everyday American?
Thank you so much for that question. So this is the first peace deal between Arabs and Israelis in over 26 years. And so it is monumental and historic, as you said. But one of the reasons why it's so fundamentally important today is because President Trump 4 years ago set out to have a vastly different policy towards the Middle East than his predecessor, President Barack Obama and Secretary John Kerry. In fact, the philosophy of that administration was to give billions of dollars of sanctions relief to the Islamic Republic of Iran under the pretense that they just sort of assumed that the Iranians would have regional hegemony and that they would get a nuclear weapon. President Trump rejected that. He decided to empower the Gulf Arab states, our allies, to empower Israel. And President Trump did a lot of moves leading up to this day for the past 4 years, like moving the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, like recognizing the Golan Heights. All of the things that we were told for years would bring World War III to the Middle East, it didn't happen. And in fact, it's bringing peace to the Middle East.
You think about that for a second. You just said this is the first deal in 26 years, and this president under this administration has now struck 2 in 29 days. That's a pretty significant record that he has right now. Morgan, some reports suggest that this deal could change the course of what's happening in the Middle East. Do you believe that that's true?
We certainly hope so. And I think one of the things that's fascinating, I go to the Middle East quite a lot with Secretary Mike Pompeo. And one of the things that's fascinating when we're traveling is the young population. They have incredibly young, under 30, under 25 population in these Gulf Arab states. And these young people who are now going into government and various leadership positions do not want to be bound by 30, 50 years of thinking about how Arabs and how Israelis should interact. In fact, they're very excited. They're excited to travel to Israel. Israelis are excited to go to the UAE and to Bahrain. These people that are in quite, 2-hour flights from each other, and they've never been to each other's countries. And so you've got to think for these populations that are so predominantly under the age of 25, they are going to grow up in a world where it's normal for Israelis and Arabs, Jews, Muslims, Christians to live in peace.
Wow, it's amazing. There are reports that other countries may join on. Is that true? And who might it be next?
Well, as we say in Arabic, inshallah. We will see who comes next. We're working on, of course, many countries. We want every country. I mean, Secretary Pompeo, when he was in Israel, even said that he hopes that eventually Iran recognizes Israel. But what we fundamentally believe is that we have to stick to the policy that we pursue in the Middle East, which is, again, keeping the maximum economic pressure campaign on Iran and empowering Israel and empowering the Gulf Arab states. And finally, what's crucial is to get the Palestinians to the table. Remember that President Trump put out a vision for peace for the Middle East earlier this year. I believe it was in February. In that vision for peace, for the first time ever, President Trump got the Israelis to agree to a Palestinian state. However, the Palestinian leadership has not come to the table for the negotiations, and we need them to do that. And we need the help of the Gulf Arab states to get the Palestinian leadership to do so.
Morgan, thank you for joining on this very historic day and breaking down what this means. I appreciate it. Hope to have you back soon.
All right, to give us another perspective on this historic peace deal between Israel, the United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain is the former acting director of national intelligence and former U.S. ambassador to Germany, Rick Grenell. Rick, welcome back to the show. Good to see you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Rick, this is a big deal. I know the media is not giving it its due, but this is a big deal for this region and for this president. The president has been a massive friend to Israel since he started, with numerous accomplishments. What I think is interesting, last cycle he got about 24% of the Jewish vote. Currently, Joe Biden leads President Trump about 67-30 in the Jewish vote, but that's up about 6%. Are actions like this, do you think, going to reflect at the ballot box this year among Jewish voters?
Such a good question. I certainly hope so. And I think that President Trump has deserved more votes. Today, and historic agreements like this would not happen if not for the fact that Donald Trump is an outsider. If you play by the Washington, D.C. rules, you don't get to this point because you listen to the Europeans on, say, the JCPOA Iran deal. The Iran deal was really a bad deal for America. And when the President Trump said, let's rip that up, let's put more pressure on the Iranians, that's not a good thing. The Europeans complained, but many Arab governments cheered. And our media really missed that. They weren't able to get that nuance. They just immediately went with the criticism from the Europeans. But today we see that the Arabs and Arab governments, majority of governments that are Muslim communities like Kosovo, they are able to step out away from this typical Washington, D.C. foreign policy establishment crowd and say, this is something that we can support, greater peace with Israel, moving our embassy like Kosovo is doing to Jerusalem. These are the types of things that happen when an outsider brings a perspective like President Trump into the situation and changes the calculus for how we do foreign policy. I think we've got to cheer Donald Trump's style. We've got to say that his style is making Americans safer and certainly bringing peace deals while he's bringing our troops home.
Rick, I want to ask you about China real quick. The U.S. State Department just lowered its travel from 4 to 3, which is do not travel, to there should be concern. But I want to show you this. A U.S. citizen saying that there is concern that people might be detained there. I feel like this is a new low, a new interesting warning for people not to go there. What does this say about our relationship with China?
I think that there's been an admission by those outside of Washington, D.C. that this kind of engagement with China, letting them into the WTO 20 years ago, that it just hasn't worked. Take the example of China being a member of the WTO. We did it because we thought in 3 or 4 or maybe 5 years we'd see China moving along the road towards human rights, capitalism, the rule of law, at least making steps in that direction. We've seen the situation get worse. I mean, look no further than Hong Kong. And so I think there's an admission now that our engagement on multilateral institutions like the WTO or the UN, it hasn't worked. China is not moving. And remember, it's a communist country. And we had all of our intelligence agencies come together, a very difficult task when they can come together and agree. But they all agreed that the COVID-19 virus started in Wuhan, China. Yeah. This is what U.S. intelligence agencies agree. And so we've got a real problem. The communist China secrecy has really crippled the world economy.
Yeah. Rick, before I let you go, there's something you've been really active on Twitter with respect to something that happened with Jake Tapper. And Breitbart suggested that he had tried to talk Sean Parnell, who's been on this show before, of running in a Pennsylvania House seat against Connor Lamb. Of course, you then texted or DM'd him, I guess, on Twitter and said, hey, is this true? Tapper says to you, nope. Right there on the screen is your DM back to him. But then the texts come out and they say something very different, Rick. They say, best of luck in your race. For the record, I wasn't trying to talk you out of running. I was trying to talk you into running in a safer district, which makes no sense, Rick. What do you mean he's talking him out of running into it? That means he would have primaried another Republican. This is a swing district in a swing state, Rick. How big of a deal is this?
Well, look, we know that many reporters who are based at CNN are advocates. They are not fair. We've seen evidence of that over and over. I think this is a real problem for CNN. You have a host for a CNN show who used to be a Democratic staffer for a Democratic congresswoman, now playing politics in Pennsylvania in a swing district to protect a Democrat seat. This is scandalous. This is something that is unprecedented, except for the fact that Washington, D.C. media has completely become advocates. And so they all shrug their shoulders at CNN, all of the newsrooms in Washington, D.C. They don't care. They don't care, Sean, because there's already an expectation that they are playing politics. Right. This isn't a surprise to them.
I cannot believe that they have covered up this too. I mean, no one's talking about it. Rick, I thank you for doing this and staying on and keeping these guys honest. I appreciate it.
All right.
Thanks, Sean. Thank you both.
You bet.
Good to see you, Rick. When we come back, we're going to take a look at how ad spending will influence the election and if Trump can win over those swing